We are, yeah.
Another 2 weeks, is it?
That's it.
Oh, yeah. Next week, yeah.
Next week.
Right,
Happy
so
days.
welcome back to the Politics and Society podcast. Today we're joined by a special guest who needs no introduction. Bertie, thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Thanks a lot, guys, and hope all is well with you fellas.
Doing very well, thank you.
Yeah, all's well with the sun on our back. So before we dive into your political career and talking about today in politics, we just want to have a look back on your early life in Drumcondra and what way that might have shaped the man you became today.
Yeah, I was born, reared, went to school in the Drumcondra area, went to Pat's in Drumcondra, now DCU. And my father worked in All Hallows College, which is now also DCU. And they've taken over most at Drumcondra, which is good because it's kept the old places there. But it's plenty of students around the place now, but they've all vanished for the summer holidays. But during the most of the year, it's a busy student place. So I was brought up in Drumcondra, so very much St. Pat's and All Hallows was very much my life. And I'd probably live about 1 minute from St. Pat's and about a half a minute from All Hallows. So our lives was very much built around the colleges, and we went to school in Pat's and then went to Christian Brothers up in Collins Avenue. So it's and I'm still living in Drumcondra, and followed Drumcondra Soccer Club and played with Drumcondra Soccer Club and Home Farm. So very much community based. Most of my activities growing up were based around sporting activities, and lucky living where we did because you had plenty of sports clubs, plenty of soccer and Gaelic and Iron tennis club, pitch and putt club. So we were very, very lucky. The only problem was that you played so many sports, you were good at none. So it would have been better to concentrate on one thing or another. But we'd good fun. It was good place to. And I was the youngest, so I'd followed my two brothers and two sisters into all their activities.
Very good.
And just seeing that you mentioned football, I know Drums were a big club there. How about since Shelbourne have moved into Talca Park, have you followed them?
Yeah, I'm a season ticket holder in Shells.
Happy days, like myself.
Yeah, but traditionally they could win a few matches now, be even better, but having a bit of a difficult run this year. But it's good, Talca needs. There was a big risk a few years ago of it being going all together. There was a big campaign, Save Drumcondra, a bit like there was Save Dalymount. The difficulty, neither ground is in good shape. I mean, the investment, there's kind of a deal done on Dalymount now, and Talca needs investment. They're getting good crowds now, but really, it probably would have been better to develop one place properly and do it. But anyway, it hasn't gone down that road. So down the road now, trying to see if they can develop it. But League of Ireland is doing better now. I think the fact that players aren't going to England so young. I've been involved in the Home Farm all my life, and we're lucky around for we are because we've St. Kevin's, we've Stella Mardas, and a lot of clubs. And traditionally, kids were going over when they were kids, over when they were 12, 13, 14, which was a nonsense because the reality was that, with the exception of a few, and there was always a few. I mean, Liam Brady was in school behind me in the Christian Brothers in St. Aidan's, and we had Dunner and a few other guys in Home Farm, but by and large, of all the players that were going over, there was a fraction of them remaining. And the sad thing was they didn't come back to football. They tended to go off and give up sport because they were disillusioned. But nowadays it's a better system. They're going over older, if they're going over at all, and that's keeping guys in League of Ireland. And I think that's probably the main reason why League of Ireland has improved. and I'm not saying it's the only reason, but I think it's probably the main reason, because you're getting better quality matches now, better quality guys. Before, I remember, we'd be up at playing 16s, 17s in home farm, and you had scouts for everybody. All of these scouts were over, picking up everybody, sending them over, on the basis that they were going to find Ronaldo or something, But it rarely happened, but it was taking players from the league. So let's hope it continues to go from strength to strength.
Please
Absolutely,
God,
yeah. Hopefully the League of Ireland stretches to Meath now. Meath, we don't have a team, so it'd be great to get a team here. But going back to...
you should have been Navan or somewhere. I mean, you're certainly big enough to... and they're working now on the this third division.
Tier,
Because we're working in home farm and the possibility of the home farm playing in that. But it's the difficulty about that is it's money. It's a lot of bucks to run a club, even if it's semi-professional, which is probably what you're talking about. But it's still expensive, But Meath, I mean, a team based in Navan should well be able to get a support base that would get you into League of Ireland.
Yeah, please God. Anyways, so just talking about the sport and obviously how much of an impact sport had on you growing up, do you think there was any other characteristics or skills that you had when you were younger that eventually led for you to go into a career in politics?
Well, I think when I, in the early 70s, growing up in the neighbourhood, you do all the normal things. You're involved in sport. It drags you into residents associations. I was secretary of a resident association, and involved in a committee of the football. So I think that gives you that community involvement, and I think that's what I liked about politics. I was either credited or blamed for being very much constituency politician, but I looked at it slightly different. I think that's what makes it interesting. You're involved with communities, you're involved with associations, with clubs, and that's where you build up friendships. And right around the constituency, we looked on it really as kind of 15 or 16 parishes, and what were the clubs in those parishes, and they were the people that we worked closely with. So I looked at each area. So we spent all my political life was being close to those communities. Rather than looking at them as the constituency, the whole constituency, it was looking at the communities, and the big communities in my area were Cabra and Navan Road and Drumcondra, Glasnevin, East Wall, North Strand, and the inner city, and Oxman Town Road, Oxman Street. So you kind of looked at them as communities. So when you worked within that community and the organisation that communities, and I considered most of those areas to be my area, even though they were out away from where you were living, maybe. So I think that's what really attracted me to politics, and the people you were with and the people you were working with. I think you hear some people now, they talk about politicians shouldn't be involved in all this. They should be legislators in the Dáil, and they should be stuck over in Dáil and legislating. Well, God forbid, that's part of their job. But the word Táchta Dála is public representative, and if a public representative is meant to represent the public, that's what the constitutional role is. And if you're not representing the public you're in, well, I'm not sure what you're meant to be doing. So it's those people who try to pigeonhole it into a different way. I disagree with. They're wrong anyway.
Yeah. Well, there you go. So I was saving this question for later on, but since you're talking about, how community-based that the public representative has to be, do you think that there's an issue in Ireland that our local government has started to lose that power, or do you think that the power should be vested more towards local government in actually, is that the reason for this kind of gap in legislators, and the local authorities don't have the power to do what they want to do?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it. The local authorities and the public represents, you say, I served 10 years on city council and worked with the city council for probably 40 years. Now, there's very fine officials in the city council. I've always found the city managers and the assistant managers and the officials were very good people. But I thought the people who were elected should certainly have more powers. They're usually, if you look at a lot of the motions that are down now in the city council meetings, they're talking about international issues and national issues. That's grand, but I think the limited hours, because most of them are part-timers, the limited hours they should be spending should be on more local issues, and I think far more of the issues in a local community should be dealt with by the local councillors. It shouldn't always be a case that the big departments are allocating money. And it's why I don't believe in this thing of elected Lord Mayors. Elected Lord Mayors are only good if you're going to give the power to the Lord Mayor. Otherwise, say in Dublin, you elect a Lord Mayor, and the Lord Mayor, all he does is goes into departments making the case for the Dublin community, or if it's down the Meath community, that's of no significance. I mean, that's a non-job in my view. If you're going to have elected mayors, you have to give the powers to the mayor, and including the main power, which is one of raising money. And if you don't give them, if the mayor doesn't have the guts to recommend local taxes and raise local taxes, well, then they're not going to have the money in their area to be able to spend and to do things. So I'd all be in favour of elected mayors if they have the powers, but I don't see any great idea of giving them the power. So it just become another layer of bureaucracy otherwise. But to answer your question, local councillors should have far more powers than they have today. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's one of the reasons why you say that the legislators, when they get criticised for spending time on their communities, like you're literally on the doorstep of Drumcondra still to this day. They're all community people. That's how they were elected in the first place. So that they should never lose that kind of. They should never be criticised for looking after their communities anyway. So I think that's a good stepping stone to go towards the next section. So I think Marv has a few questions for you now to talk about your political career.
Yeah, so just so Bertie, I'm just looking at your kind of CV, I suppose. You were first elected to the Dáil in 1977. That was a very big election for the Fina Fall party, a landslide election. You were chief whip. You served in multiple cabinet ministries. Under two Taoiseach, you were Taoiseach, and you were Taoiseach for 3 consecutive terms. What's in your mind, over that long time? What's your biggest achievements?
Well, I enjoyed it, all the posts. I was very lucky. You could be an elected politician for a long time, and you could have been a backbencher either in government or opposition for a long time. I was lucky that I was chief whip when I was young. It was a fascinating period because the Dáil was very tight. So I was chief whip in government and sat at the cabinet table, and I was chief whip in opposition, sitting at the front bench table. And there were exciting times in politics, great personalities around at that time. Charlie Haughey and Gareth Fitzgerald, and there were Verdi and the respective cabinets were big names. All guys well older than me, but it was great. It was a great learning curve to be there, and to be chief whip in at a time when it was a minority government. You had no option but to learn the rules of the Dáil and how things worked. I mean, if you had a big majority, you could have winged it along, but you couldn't do that when it was so tight. And then, I was in opposition during a time when the economy was very bad in Ireland, when it was high unemployment. I was Labour public service spokesperson. And it was a great learning time. It was a busy time, I have to say. It was, at the time, I felt nearly abused at the amount of work I had, because my brief was Labour and public service, and Rory Quinn was the Minister for Labour. John Boland was the Minister for Public Service. Enda Kenny was the Minister of State. And a fellow called Jim O'Keefe was the Minister of State. So I was directly dealing with four people, two full ministers, two ministers of state. So you were nearly on the Dáil floor every day on some brief or another, or some legislation or another. And the four of them had civil servants behind them, and at big departments, and I was trying to do most of it on my own, maybe one person. But I'd built up a voluntary backup group of people who knew the trade union scene, and knew the training scene. So we were able to actually achieve a lot. So it was a very exciting time. And then when I became Minister of Labour in '87, it was the start of social partnership, when we decided that the country was a bit of a basket case, that we were going to build up a social partnership between the government of the day, the trade unions, the employer groups, and the farmers. And that was really, it was novel, it was exciting. It wasn't really the first time in the world it was done. It was kind of a Nordic model. Sweden, Finland tend to do that kind of a system. That's where we studied a lot of these systems, my backup group. And then, we did that. We set up FOSS, and we were involved with CERTA, the hotel training group. So, it was busy. And then all the strikes at that time. And we kind of social partnership moved Ireland away from, strikes and to a new trade union. We brought in, it was amazing that we brought in the 1990 Trade Union Act, which was, the first major overhaul of the trade unions or labour laws in Ireland since 1906. And, there were all kind of things about people being paid into their bank accounts. We were changing old acts from the truck acts of the 1850s, and we're bringing in part-time legislation for the first time ever. There was no rights for part-time workers. And then we did the Health and Safety Acts of 1989. So it was a really, exciting time to be in, busy. But thankfully I was young and energetic, and it was a really good time. And then that led me on to finance, because I did 87, 89, and I was still. And then in finance, I was actually appointed 3 times because the way the governments and the Dáil changed. So and then I was in leader of the opposition for a few years when John Bruton was Taoiseach, and on to me Taoiseach. So I can never complain. You look back on it, I was almost 20 years at the cabinet table, and another 5 or 10 years on the front bench table of opposition of a major party. So I've no growls. There were always busy times, but it was the pressure of work. When I look back at it, sometimes you wonder how you did it. But like when you're in the thing, you just get on with it, as you guys know.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. There's probably one big achievement from your career that always stands out, which is the Good Friday Agreement negotiations in 1998, and I suppose you were one of the major figures at that point in time in bringing in that agreement, ending 30 years of violence in the north, and it's something I've been thinking about. Say if we look at contemporary events, we look at the search for a peace deal in Ukraine, for instance. There's a bit of maybe a bit of uneasiness about, say, President Trump, and say, from your point of view as someone with experience in peace negotiations, would you think President Trump is a good partner for peace?
Well, the thing about President Trump is, I think if you knew what his policy was, it'd be easier to work at. Some days he makes very promising statements, and you say that's great. We seem to be moving in the right direction, and then literally 24 hours later he'll contradict, and not alone contradict, but he'll almost deny that he ever said the first one. So that makes it just difficult. You're sometimes you're better off with somebody being consistent. And I think time will tell But the difficulty with the Trump presidency, and it's not just on peace issues like Gaza or Ukraine or Sudan or any of these, it's just generally that, when you get inconsistency and uncertainty, that leads to an inability of people to make decisions. So what happens is they don't make decisions, and things just stop, and so many things just sit on the back burner, and that's what's happening. It's happening in business. It's happening in policy areas across the world in so many areas, and that's the position. I mean, the Indians are annoyed with him now because what he seemed to slant himself more to Pakistan.
Yeah.
You're tired listening to the Gaza story, where he just seems to be very, very one-sided on it all. And then he makes it when he goes to the Gulf last week. He kind of changes that a bit, and nobody knows which side he's on between Putin and Zelensky. So it's that uncertainty is the difficulty. I far prefer dealing with peace policy. You know where people stand. Like we were able to deal. I was dealing with the North brief probably. Well, I'm still dealing with it today, even though in different ways involving Queens and think tanks in the North. But from 91 right to 2008, I was dealing with 17, 18 years of it. And at least you got to know the characters. You knew what they stood for. You knew where they were, and whether they were difficult people like Ian Paisley or David Trimble, or whether it was dealing with Jerry Adams, Mark McGuinness. Kind of, you knew where you were. You knew what their case was, and there you could try and get to understand it, to work with them, try and seek out compromises, seek middle ground, that's what you have to do. You have to try and see if you can make long-term solutions. But if somebody is jumping right, left, and centre, you're not sure what you're trying to do or where you can get delivered. And time might show that he's not that kind of a person, but he at the moment he's just creating so much uncertainty and instability that it's not good for anybody, including, by the way, for Americans.
Yeah, indeed. And actually, while we're on President Trump, I'm also wondering about, in the context of, say, the protectionism we now see in the United States with his tariff policies. I wonder whether, in hindsight, was it maybe a mistake for this country to base our economic model on offering a lot of low tax incentives to American companies?
No, I don't think so. I mean, you'd like to probably get a better balance. You'd like to have more indigenous companies, being bigger. You'd like to have more Kerrys, like the Kerry Group and CRH, and so if the more indigenous Irish companies, even if maybe all the investment in them isn't Irish, but at least the boards are here. But I think we decided way back from the 60s to try and go with some of the new models, and I think at the time people didn't really understand too much what some of those things were. But like we started talking about software before, I think anybody here probably knew too much about it, but it was a good idea. And then we kind of went for 4 or 5 areas. We had our indigenous food and drinks industry, which are still big and still powerful. That was one. Then we had the broad area of ICT, information communication technologies. Then you pharmaceutical chemicals was 3. Then you develop a tourist industry, a really good tourist industry. And then there was the last one was financial services, including insurance and aviation, aircraft lease, and all of those really law, service and the law firms are all built into one. So, like, they were the 4 or 5 areas that we had, and I think, they were good. And I think the reason we did well in those was, one, that we had consistent policy. Whoever was in power followed the same policies. That we gave long-term commitments to these companies, because the pharmaceutical companies tend to think in 30-year cycles. You get Bristol Myers Squibb or Eli Lilly, they come in and they do investments. They've finished up one in Limerick now, what, $1.5 billion. So they're long-term investments and they look for certainty. And they wanted to know that we had a good education system, which I would think was probably number one in attracting people here. Tax obviously was a very important one. And, consistency of government, that they knew where governments were, that they weren't, jumping from one thing to another. So I think we got the balance right. Now, having said that, if Trump really got his teeth in, which worries me, into the pharmaceutical industry, he could do us a lot of harm, because he tends. I have a problem with the way he thinks in these issues, but I'm not president of the United States, unfortunately. He is. He sees things as, if there's a big Irish company that's producing a huge amount of drugs for around the world, but it's really an American company, then it should be in America. That's how he sees it, So a company down, Pfizer or any of the big ones, no, they shouldn't be here, they should be there. Now, he does not take into account the reason they're here is that maybe environmentally it suits the companies to do that. They get good staff, they've big areas of land, they get very bright people, boys and girls, young people, who do PhDs and are really good. So and not to say anything disrespectful about some of their own education system, but a lot of the companies moved out because they were in regions where they weren't able to get people. And then again, like if you walk into Microsoft or somewhere here, they're not all Irish people. We have that system where they're allowed to bring in software engineers from different parts of the world. So we have all those flexibilities. And of course, that's not to take away from the fact that, let's say any of those companies, let's say they make 100 million. Now, they make far more, but let's say it's 100 million. A large part of that money is repatriated back into the United States to American shareholders. So it's not a loss to America. It's going back into mainly Donald Trump's mates. They're the big business guys in the Republican Party. So his understanding of these issues is very frivolous, So, but we have to be careful because he could do damage to some of the industries. And as your question was we're in 4 or 5 areas because we did so much with America. And America is a superpower. And I suppose the one thing I started the Asian strategy in 1998, and I'd like to see that it's working, but there's huge economies in Indonesia and in Hong Kong and in mainland China, and we should be all the time working with them. I know there's some problems of human rights and all that, but we there's problems everywhere, and we have to be trading in the world. So rather than us thinking maybe that the industries are wrong, we should be expanding ourselves out into new markets and trying to build up those markets, because at the moment probably a lot of it is American based.
Indeed, absolutely. Thank God me and Harry are going into teaching because Mr. Trump isn't after hard jobs.
He'll keep away from you. He'll keep away from you guys.
Yeah. Maybe, Harry, do you want to move on to your next question?
Yeah, so now we're going to touch on, just the current political landscape and a couple of questions that we just have in relation to that. The first one that I have for you is just about a united Ireland. Now, I know you're hugely patriotic, and as you've mentioned, you've been fighting for Ireland for many, many decades, but what's your opinion on a united Ireland, or what are the chances of us seeing a united Ireland in the coming few years?
Well, I think you never can put a date on it, but I do think we can get, maybe rather than calling it United Ireland, as I've moved away in recent years to call it a New Ireland. And the way of doing that is to try and work with all of the people on this island to try and find a way that we can accommodate each other, accommodate our cultures and the kind of businesses that we're involved in, our languages and that. And you guys know in history that there is a difference between nationalism and Irishness and Britishness, and more correctly rather than Britishness is Ulster Scots. It is a different tradition, and I've been dealing with them now for 35 years, and they do think differently, and I think we have to try and see if we can accommodate that. Now that's happening. There's a lot of things happening. There's a lot of good work. Like the St. Patrick's Day parade this year, with hand-picked bands playing suitable music, came down to Shankill this year, and people from the Lilas areas came out and as they did in Dublin for St. Patrick's Day, watching it. That was a huge issue, and it didn't get a lot of publicity, which is a good thing. Just leave these things happen. A lot of work, a lot of good work going on now on the 12th of July, the bonfires, to move them, not trying to talk about what we thought years ago, that we'd ban them and get rid of them and all that, but now to try to make them culturally accepted, where people can see them in a different light. There's a lot of good work going on, and people working away in the background, working in various communities. I forget what they call them, development officers kind of people, working in trying to, and it's about £1 million a year being spent on that, just to get that cultural element. So, I think that we have to, as I brought Paisley to the Battle of the Boyne site. We brought that as a museum centre. So I think it's good that we can celebrate each other's cultures, and if those things are done respectfully, then I think we can move to a position where we can start accommodating each other. Now, some people want to do that overnight. Like, you hear some experts, you guys are in education, more about than I do, but you hear what we need is integrated education in Northern Ireland. Now, well, maybe you do, but it's not going to happen. So it's not going to happen in the short term, not to mind the long term. But what you can have is schools in Northern Ireland working together and cooperating together and reaching out to each other's community. I was talking to Reverend Harold Good recently, and he was telling me that up in Methodist College, that there's now about 45% of the whole student intake is Catholic. That they haven't changed the board, they haven't changed probably the ethos, but they've changed that people are happy to go and build. They obviously deal with whatever way they could deal with education and religion and that, but they're working out these. And then I've been in schools in Belfast with Tony Blair last year, 2 years ago, for the anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, where we went down where Catholic and Protestant schools weren't integrated, but they were into one area, and where somebody say if the Catholic school didn't have a Spanish teacher, kids that wanted to do Spanish would go to the Protestant school, and vice versa for German. And that the coffee bar was placed in an area between the two. So where every day, boys and girls from the Catholic school were meeting boys and girls from the Protestant school. So without trying to take the big jump, that's not going to happen, and upset everybody, mainly the parents and the communities. But leave it develop and let it grow incrementally, and that's the way we can work our way towards a new accommodation. And I think, to answer your question, can that happen? I think it will, once it's done carefully, and once we don't beat any drums. If you start, if someone like me was to go out tomorrow and say we need a united Ireland next year and we need a referendum before Christmas and all, like that message is just received all wrong in unionist areas, as much as the British government coming out saying something that would irk nationalists. So we have to accept there are different communities, different DNAs, and it just has to be handled with care. But it is possible. That's why we have the Good Friday Agreement, and that's why we don't have any sectarian violence anymore, thank God.
And just on that note about United Ireland, do you think one way in which we could start to integrate that into our community is by actually having a United Ireland vote for the presidency?
Yeah, well, I tell you, there's a lot to be said for people in the north having a vote. Um, I don't know how it would probably have to be done as part of an overall arrangement. I don't think it would be done as a separate issue. I don't think that it is likely to happen. But I do think as part of an overall deal, it would become the way of life, and whether it's 10, 20 or 30 years time, I don't think that will be a big problem, quite frankly, because people in the north do take a big interest in our elections, and we take a big interest in their elections. So whether it's the Assembly or the Dáil or Mayoralties, we take a big interest in that, and they take a big interest in I spent a lot of time with loyalist leaders and that, and they know very well what's going on down here.
Very good. I wanted to ask you, Bertie, what do you think are like the biggest challenges facing the country today?
Well, I think with the growing population, when I was Minister for Labour, we had 3.5 million, and the population was declining. Now, a generation later, we've 5 million, rapidly expanding, and that has created numerous problems, probably all around the one area. It's created housing, is the one always up in lights, but it's generally it's infrastructure, whether that's water, electricity. I think we've probably dealt with the roads thing fairly well in my time when we got the link up in roads, but we need it in we need it in water, we need it in electricity, we need it in sewage. We need to be able to do these things far quicker than we are, and that's what's delaying a lot of the housing. Now, of course, a lot of the people who you hear now up on their bar stool or their coffee stool shouting about housing are the same people that were on their stool when I was building 80 and 90,000 houses, ridiculing me. And I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember the people who are going around that were talking about all these estates that we were going to have forever more, and we were going to have all these estates and we'd never be able to sell the houses. Of course, that was all nonsense. And now everyone says we need to build 60,000 houses. Sure, a few years ago I was building 90, and all of these experts were saying, "Oh, you're ruining the place." Anyway, they're always wrong, these people. And there will be next time or another 20 years as well. But we do need to build. We need better, faster planning, faster building. And of course, the sad thing was a lot of the people who were building houses, particularly the small builders, they were buried in the international financial crash, and a lot of people here had no sympathy with them, but unfortunately a lot of that generation, we need to try and get them back again. I mean, small builders, when I was younger, the country was full of small builders everywhere, in rural communities, city communities, people who would build 50 to 100 houses a year. Now there's this view, if you're not a PLC and building 500 houses, there's something wrong with you. So I think we need to get back to a lot of that. But listen, let's be honest about it. Because of the rising population, it's not because of anything else. If we 3.5 million people and we had to keep going down, there would have been plenty of empty houses and vacant houses and ghost estates, but that isn't the way it's gone. Our population is expanding fairly rapidly. The next census will be probably 5.25 million, which is, so if you take where we've come in a generation from 3.5, it's a lot. And that's a big challenge, and it's a challenge I think is going to remain for the next decade at least.
Absolutely, yeah. We can relate to that, trying to enter the housing market in our mid-20s,
Yeah.
So there you
I
go.
may be recording this in my mad's box room.
Yeah. No, it's listen, guys, I totally understand, and I see the rents around here, for young people, even if they're single, not to mind couples. I mean, they're crippling. They're crippling, and the trouble with rents is it's dead money, because you spend 5-6 years renting, and you have nothing to show for it. Whether you spend 4 or 5 years of a mortgage, You know, you're out. But other countries have dealt with. Like I was reading, and I met a group last year, from some of the northern countries. You know, when I was looking at houses for the first time in the early 70s, you know, they were moving from 20 years to 25-year mortgages. And then over that long period, maybe 50 years now, people move to 30-year mortgages. But in other countries, they look at it differently, and they go for far longer mortgages. You know, they go to 40-year mortgages. So, you know, it's how you stretch out. But in the end of the day, the big issue is supply. At the end of the day, if we don't supply, if you were to take between now and the end of the decade, which is what, roughly 5 years, you know, till 2030. If you go on the figures that are produced, we probably need somewhere in the order of 400,000 houses. 400,000 houses. If you base it on last year's figures, now I know that's controversial. Some people said should have been higher, but anyway, let's base it on last year's figures at around 35. You know, that's 165. It's a hell of a difference, lads. You are probably better in the maths, sharper brains than I, but 400,000, 165. You see where the problem is. Like you have to get yourself up. Maybe not to 80,000, but you have to get yourself up to 60,000.
Absolutely. And then even going back to personally yourself, you know, talking about how much of your life has been taken up by politics, and you know, obviously you're still involved in politics, but as an elected representative, what do you miss most and least about that life?
I suppose the thing, overall I don't miss it that much, to be honest with you. You know, and I try a lot of the time not to listen to the radio or the TV, because it is a depressive dog, not to mind a person. But I think you miss kind of doing things. You know, you can. The one good thing about politics, if you work hard, you can actually achieve things. You can do things. You know, you can get behind a school project, you build a school. You know, you can get behind a road project. You know, the roads. I remember when I chaired the infrastructural committee for 11 years every Thursday. And, you know, the projects we were building, the road to Waterford, you know, through the bridge in Wexford. We were going to Cork. We were going to Limerick Road, to Belfast Road, Galway Road. And you know, people said, oh, you'll never get this. But anyway, by and large, in my time, spending big money now, and some of that was European money, but most of it was Irish money. You know, we got that done. So it was a great sense of satisfaction. I loved that infrastructural committee. And we did put the emphasis on roads, because we believed that would open up the country. And, you know, and at that time, the water thing and electricity thing didn't seem so big. I think just the huge increase in population made that a bigger issue in the last 10 to 15 years. But I think they can be tackled. The things, so that you'd miss that. The things I don't miss is listening to people just blathering away, criticising everything you ever do. I remember I have to say I was single-handedly responsible for the tunnel that leads into Dublin, because it was 30,000 trucks coming through Marino, Fairview, Drumcondra, Fisborough, and we wanted to get the trucks out. So, you know, the tunnel from the airport in. And all of the things I had to listen to for 6 or 7 years or more. I started that when I was Minister of Finance in 92, finished it in 2005, I think it was. And the houses would fall into the tunnel, and the cars would fall out of the tunnel, and the trucks would fall out of the tunnel, and there'd be leaks. You never heard such a balderdash. And funny enough, the day it opened, I never heard anything since. And thankfully, nobody has fallen in or out of the tunnel. The only thing that happens now is when it breaks down and it's closed for the day, everybody is saying, Jesus, remember the way it was before. So I said, remember, I was responsible for it. But anyway, the people forget that too.
Absolutely, they're quick to forget.
Oh, don't tell me.
Bertie, I'd like to ask you what's your views on Irish neutrality? Because I think it's a debate that's coming up a little bit more now, say in the context of with Ukraine. There's some who think maybe we should join NATO. There's also on the other side, say we see the appalling events in Gaza. There's there's concerns about is Shannon Airport being used for armaments heading for the Israeli forces, and I know in your time there was speculation about the US military using Shannon in the Iraq war. What do you feel about our foreign policy? Should we stick to the old style neutrality, or should we?
No, nothing remains the same, but I do think we should stick to being a neutral country. But that doesn't mean, you can be military neutral and not political neutral. I think Irish people want us to be involved in the St. Petersburg tasks, as they used to call them, the Petersburg tasks, which are peace building, where our people, in the 60s, our soldiers went to the Congo, and ever since we've gone everywhere. We've gone East Timor. I remember being down with them on the Indonesian border. And we've sent troops all over the world, all over the world. All of us on peacekeeping. Like we've been down in the Middle East and those difficult areas, in Lebanon for donkey's years. So I think that involvement, but not on frontline military duties, and that's not our army afraid of these things. It's the fact that that's our policy. So we're involved in logistics, we're involved in travel, we're involved in medical supplies, we're involved in supplies generally, we're involved in community relationships, which our guys do a great job on. So they're all the things we should be involved in and continue to be involved in. I think the idea of ever joining NATO, I'd be definitely out more noon and night canvassing against that. I don't see it, and I don't think we ever should do it. I totally oppose it. But the current argument, I suppose, is down to the triple lock. And the triple lock, I was involved in that 23 years ago in 2002 in a referendum after Nice and, before Amsterdam and all that. And that centred around that it should be a vote of the government, a vote of the Dáil, and there should be UN sanction. Now, I would have a lot of sympathy to that. But the difficulty is nowadays, and you have to listen to people who are involved in this, that it's nearly impossible to get EU sanction for anything, because either one of the big boys, China, Russia, or whatever, America, not to mind a few of the other ones, but they veto everything. So the problem is, if you follow that line, maybe you can be involved in nothing. So that's a debate now. I think it's open for the government to deal with. But that is the argument, and it's not for me to call the argument. I called it where I called it at the time, because it was the view of the Irish people. We should do that. I do understand that things like that was a time where Kofi Annan was bringing in reforms to try and to make the mechanics of the Security Council simpler, and he involved a number of people, including our own Bertie Ahern, who was foreign minister at that stage, in that. But to be honest, that didn't come to pass, and Kofi Annan, made some reforms, but he wasn't able to do what he wanted to do. So the Security Council nowadays, it's just impossible to get decisions out of it. I mean, there's always somebody against. So that's the difficulty that the government have to now address, and that's why they're looking at this issue again. But military neutral is not the way to go. I think politically neutral is our. We're not into military escalation in any form. And as far as Shannon, we allowed troops to go from Afghanistan and not carrying military targets, but carrying soldiers, and I still believe that's the right thing to do.
Absolutely. And just with relation to the big election that's coming up in November, what are the chances of seeing Bertie Ahern's name on the ballot sheet?
Well, you know as much as me. No, I said three things. I said you have to see what the parties say and what my own party says, and that's a decision I presume they'll come to shortly. then you have to see, what the polls say. Would you have much support? Because it's no good going for things for the sake of having a bit of fun, if you have support, then it's worth looking at it. If you don't, and then thirdly, I'd have to say, if at this young age that I am, am I up to doing 7 years in that job, even if I was elected? So they're the three things you have to consider. But hopefully soon enough we'll get to the end of that debate.
There you go. Never say never now. And I think that's a good catalyst for the last question that Marv has for you as well.
Yeah, so say there's questions maybe that Fina Fall and Fine Gael should run maybe one candidate in the presidential election. But, I think about, yourself, Bertie, you were obviously a leader of Fina Fall, and you were a minister, a TD. I think about, I know your own parents were staunch supporters of Fina Fall going back to the De Valera days. Your father would have rendered service in the anti-treaty side in the Civil War. So, you're rooted in the Fina Fall tradition. You were knocking on the door of an overall majority in 2002. And then, fast forward 20 odd years later, Fina Fall, Fine Gael are, they're on, we had the conference and supply arrangement originally, then we're on our second consecutive coalition government with rotating Taoiseach agreements. Fina Fall, if I can paraphrase Bob Dylan, they're tangled up in blue shirts. And, I wonder, what's the future? Are we going to have a merger between Fina Fall, Fine Gael, or are we going to keep up this arrangement of, keeping independent identities, targeting maybe slightly different voter demographics?
Well, I think, you can never be too sure about the future. I think, I think there's a bit too many parties in the Republic at the moment. I don't get why Social Democrats and Labour don't mend their ways and join up together, because really they came from the one place in more recent years and personality politics, but that doesn't look likely. And the left is so small that it's fairly small numbers. So, but I don't see Fina Fall and Fine Gael. But you wouldn't know down the road. They could go. You saw what happened in Germany for a long time. Two parties were very close. Then they're going to start separating away. A bit has happened in Spain and in Greece as well. So it could go either way. Though I don't detect. Fina Fall have elected quite a number of very good young men and women in the last election, and they're quite a nationalistic Irish-speaking group. I think it's kind of almost gone unnoticed. They have a lot of people now in the mid-20s, late 20s, who are probably going to be the future in 15 years' time. So I don't detect any graph in them to go to the one-party system. So I think it could pull apart as quick as it would pull together. I certainly, my family tradition was based on republicanism, and that's what brought us all into, in the national question, and they were the issues that attracted me and most of the people who supported me through 40 years of politics. So I don't detect it. That's not to say I have a lot of admiration for a lot of the people in Fine Gael, a lot of very good people there. As I had in the Labour Party. I mean, I worked very hard with the late Brian Lennon Senior to try and pull the Labour Party and Fina Fall together back 30 years ago. And we succeeded in doing that, but then the beef tribunal got in the way, and that kind of messed that up. Probably, as I used to say to Joe Higgins in the Dáil, he and I were the only two socialists in the place, and I still think that I would still be on the Republican Socialist side of the world.
Well, there you go. Look, at Bertie, from myself and Marv, I'd like to thank you. It's been an honour to have you on the podcast as the inaugural first guest as well. There's no better man to do it. So thanks very much for coming on the show.
Well, to Harry and Ian, listen, we wish you well, lads, and I hope when you finish up your courses soon enough that you get and enjoy the summer, and hopefully have a good summer and take a break from everything.
We will,
absolutely.
don't you worry about that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thanks, Bertie.
See you guys.
Very much.
Be safe.